Walks like an animal, talks like an animal, must be an animal. Come hear the animals, talking animals, talking animals. It walks like an animal, talks like an animal, must be an animal. Come hear the animals, talking animals, talking animals.
Good morning, this is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest today is Justin Barker, who has a compelling story, or really compelling stories, plural. I heard Barker when I recently attended the International Captive Wildlife Conference, a 2-day symposium organized by the Performing Animal Welfare Society, or PAWS, a trailblazing organization that operates in Northern California, sanctuary housing elephants and other animals, and just celebrated its 40th anniversary. The conference featured an array of panels and lectures exploring various facets of captive wildlife, and Barker's talk quickly telegraphed a precocious advocate, having founded an organization called Citizens Lobbying for Animals and Zoos at age 13. Other hallmarks of his distinctive narrative include being named Teen People magazine as one of 20 teens who will change the world, and writing a young adult memoir called Bear Boy, the true story of a boy, 2 bears, and the fight to be free. As one measure of his commitment to expand his anti-captivity advocacy, as well as one measure of his major league technical skills, a blind reader contacted Barker just last week asking if he could create an audio version of Bear Boy. Barker produced the audiobook the very next day, and it officially launched yesterday. We'll hear a snippet of that audiobook, in fact, later in the show. He's also the founder of San Francisco Zoo Watch, which chronicles the years-long string of animal deaths, plus at least one patron death, and various other forms of alleged mismanagement by the San Francisco Zoo. We'll discuss some of those very things when I speak with Justin Barker in just a moment here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Coming up later in today's program, I'll talk with Nadia Tenery, an organizer of Thanks Vegan, the 15th annual potluck extravaganza held on Thanksgiving Day tomorrow, November 28th, the Unitarian Universalist of Tampa. We're still unsure how you'd like to spend Thanksgiving or with whom. Thanksgiving might provide a pretty good solution. Plus, we have important info to share. For instance, there's a formula for what you pay relative to the dish that you bring. We'll address those details and others when I chat with Nadia Tenery later in the show. Also, in case we run out of time towards the end of the show, let me just say now, happy Thanksgiving and happy Thanks Vegan to you and yours. Right now, though, let's talk with Justin Barker about the realm of advocating against animal captivity since his early teens, writing a memoir about some of that work and more. It's a reminder that I invite you to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663, emailing dj@wnf.org, or texting 813-433-0885. Let's welcome Justin Barker to Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Duncan. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on Talking Animals. Really looking forward to this conversation. So,
I am excited about this.
Okay, great. Well, let's hope you feel that way at the end. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But as I noted in the opening, you've got a really compelling story, and it really arguably more than one compelling story. Beginning as a veritable whippersnapper, I've long been interested in precocious young activists, and I've interviewed a number of them over the years on this show. So I'd love to start kind of this morning by rewinding your tape to early childhood and ask you to tell me that story. Well, tell me how things got started. What was the family culture then, for example, when you were a kid?
Funnily, my start kind of around kind of realizing the impact that kids could have in the world was Thanksgiving. My parents took me to to volunteer at an organization for the homebound elderly. and I was probably 8 years old. And essentially, I was just amazed. Wow, we're looking for donations for food. We're getting it to people who have no family and need a Thanksgiving meal. And essentially, when I was very young, I started calling folks about pies and getting pies donated and getting all sorts of things donated. And that was actually really the start of my, to say, activism, or just realizing what a young person could do. I was like, wow, like there's a need, and I get on the phone, and all of a sudden we have 50 pies that arrive that we get to distribute to people. So that actually started everything for me. Fast forward a few years later, I lived in the suburbs of Sacramento and really struggled there. My parents were, my dad was a school social worker and my mom was a nurse. So there was always that was the culture in our house, was kind of giving back to our community and being in service of people. But one summer, my dad said, what do you plan on doing this summer? And my plan was to really hide away and watch TV, avoid the high temperatures of the valley of Sacramento. And he said, you're not going to do that. And what happened was I ended up at a used bookstore and found this book about animal rights. And that book really opened my eyes to the realities of what animals face in agriculture, in factory farms. Literally, I went vegetarian the day sitting in that bookstore. I said, I'm not going to participate in this. I cannot believe that I've been eating animals my whole childhood. So I went vegetarian in that bookstore, and then ended up getting to a chapter about the ways that animals suffer in captivity. And the more I read about that, the more it just really resonated with me. And essentially what happened was I begged my dad. I said, Dad, please, I know what I'm going to do this summer. I'm not going to sit in the house all day. I need you to take me to the Sacramento Zoo so that I can investigate what's happening at the Sacramento Zoo. And that really started it all. And, I had early wins there. I ended up connecting with zookeepers who gave me all this information about what was happening at the zoo. And that ended up, I ended up into the Sacramento Zoo getting their AZA accreditation tabled. And so that was really the beginning of my activism journey.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, there's a few things I might want to circle back and double check or follow up with. One thing is, for example, even before you got into the book and the impact that it had on you, you acknowledge that your family, your parents were, kind of serving people or serving the public, or sort of minded of helping others. But still, there's something more than to this, I think, even back then, because just sort of the get up and go entrepreneurial spirit of like lining up that many pies as a little kid. There was something else going on besides being exposed to people that were inclined to help people. Can you address what that might have been, or is that just kind of something that was just?
Yeah, definitely. I was not your normal kid. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I was always, from an early age, people kind of pinpointed that I wasn't that typical, and that kind of was, you must be gay. Even from when I was 3 years old, or 4 years old, I was in ballet, and the neighborhood kids teased me so much about that I was a boy in ballet. And so I really struggled with that. In junior high, there was a lot of bullying happening. And so there was a lot of struggles, and my parents, in that struggle for myself, I don't think my parents knew how to help me or support me. So there was a lot of challenges at school, in the neighborhood, and at home. There was a lot of struggles in my life then.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I mean, the bullying is never great, but what it does often spur in people is like a real kind of rallying and sort of fight for better treatment or equality, not just for the person that's being bullied, but just as you look across the landscape. So it sounds like that might figure into this story.
It certainly does. It took me a long time to realize how that all played together. At the time I was just like, oh, I want to help animals in zoos. Like I wasn't aware of what might have inspired that. But as you mentioned, I ended up writing Bear Boy, the story about this journey. And that's when I really kind of put the pieces together of, wow, like I really felt in some ways trapped by, gender stereotypes and, in a place that was uninspiring for me living in the suburbs. And I think I really realized how my desire to help animals stuck in cages so far from their natural homes really kind of paralleled my own story. So it's certainly years later I kind of put the pieces together.
Yeah,
how that was
kind of connected your own dots, as it were. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we'll get into Bear Boy, but in a moment, including the audiobook and some of the aspects that go with that. But one of the things I also wanted to circle back with is you allude to this book that you found in the used bookstore, and we should, I think, know what that book was and who the author was.
Yeah, it was actually 101 Things Kids Could Do to Save the Animals, and it was a book by Ingrid Newkirk. So it was a PETA book. And it was this, a pretty cool book that was, there were very short chapters that highlighted all sorts of aspects of, animal rights and what kids can do. And I think the most powerful part of that book wasn't just like, hey, here are the problems, here's how humans treat animals. But it was actually, there was phone numbers and ways to take action for animals. And so I immediately got really into it. I was calling, the 800 numbers to Neiman Marcus saying, hey, why are you selling fur? I was calling the, toilet paper manufacturers and saying, why are you cutting down the rainforest? So that book really inspired me to, from my bedroom, from the suburbs of Sacramento, starting to feel empowered. Like I have a voice. I, even as a 12, 13-year-old, can really speak up and start advocating. So it was a really powerful book for me. Yeah,
well, again, it's interesting the way things fit together, because it sounds like the same kid that was like lining up all these pies and had no shyness or hesitancy about, doing what it took to get the pies over there, connected with the information in the Ingrid Newkirk book, and then said, well, here's what I got to do to help animals in the way that's being suggested in this book, or which I maybe already have an inclination to do. So, so when you finally ended up at the Sacramento Zoo, what struck you?
What I think just the state of animals. The book really describes certain aspects of how animals suffer in captivity, the pacing, the, repetitive behaviors, just essentially the whole list of things to watch out for about how animals might be suffering in captivity were all present the very first day that I arrived there. They had a polar bear. It was 105 degrees, and this polar bear is in this concrete exhibit with a pool that it could hardly get into. It was just like wow, this book is describing everything that I'm seeing here at the zoo. And it's pretty bad. It was a small zoo. Many of the cages were and exhibits were just straight out of the Depression era. And it was pretty shocking to realize that my local zoo was as bad as the book described many zoos.
Yeah, well, it almost sounds too like, based on your sort of background and what you'd been through as a kid and some other stuff, that even perhaps if you hadn't come across that book, but you somehow wound up at the Sacramento Zoo, you'd probably have similar response to what you were seeing in terms of the enclosures, the exhibits, the polar bear, and the blazing heat, etc. You probably, I think, still would have, it sounds like, would have been bothered by it and would have said, okay, I got to do something about this.
Certainly, like one of the flashbacks I had when I was, and I write about this in the book, was I flashed back to one of my early trips to the Sacramento Zoo when I was in second grade. I realized that that I had this experience with the Sacramento Zoo previously. My second grade had adopted a black-footed cat, and then this cat was in these terrible conditions, very tiny cage, kids teasing her, and yeah, so I certainly had like a soft spot for animals from a very early age, and I think that the book was just helped me realize that there were other people that cared about animals, and that this meant that this was not just a feeling, this was real, that these issues were real, the way that humans think they can treat animals is a problem. And so I think the book helped me realize, not feel so alone in what was just an emotional response. Right.
And also I think, and you probably found this yourself over the years, that people who have been bullied as kids and for one reason or another often find themselves gravitating towards animals and helping animals.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just so relatable. It's so like, oh, wow, like this, the bullying that I'm experienced is happening in the most grandest level to animals. And justified, for the, what money folks can make off him.
Yeah. Well, so you had a lot of things going on and a lot of exposure to important information, even as you were barely not even a teen yet. So talk to me about the genesis of citizens lobbying for animals in zoos.
I realized early on, as I started talking to keepers and realizing that I could have an impact and that, as a young person, I was able to make change. I was like, it's time to start an organization. I'd spend many lunch times in junior high in the library, and I really vividly remember saying, I need to start an organization, and going to the librarian, and the librarian helping me, create some names, helping me kind of brainstorm some names, and I ended up on Citizens Lobbying for Animals in Zoos, called CLAWS, and I really love that idea of like clawing at the zoo industry, at least at the Sacramento Zoo. Yeah. And it was really powerful. I started this organization, and it actually, I continued doing work for the Sacramento Zoo to advocate for the animals there. And then, funnily, at the time it wasn't that funny, the zoo director, because of all this stuff, the AZA tabling and all the media coverage around the problems at the zoo director threatened to sue me. And my parents kind of freaked out.
And you were 13 at this time? Or
I was 13, yeah. And my parents said, she's not going to sue you. You're not old enough to be sued. She's going to sue us for slander, and you need to find a new project. And luckily, because I had Citizens Lobbying for Animals in Zoos, I had listed the organization, and, at the time, there was not, any internet. So some directories about animal rights organizations had published about CLAWS, and it was listed around in the, there was the telephone trees and the, mailers that would go out. It was, pre-internet. So people had kind of heard about that there was this organization advocating for animals. And I think they just assumed it was like a small PETA or a small organization. Little did they know it was a 13-year-old who had started this. But I had gotten an email, I got a letter in the mail saying, we heard about what's happening at the Sacramento Zoo, there's two bears living not so far from Sacramento that are desperately in need of your help. So that really kind of having that organization really propelled my ability to connect with a broader audience.
And so in classic young teen style, you pretty much ignored your parents who were telling you, hey, back off on the zoo stuff.
Yeah, I decided to stop working on the Sacramento Zoo because they said I didn't have an option, actually. I didn't have any way to get to the zoo. And it was almost like fate intervened when I got that letter, because it was within weeks of my parents saying, you can't continue working on the Sacramento Zoo. We can't afford to be sued. And so I kind of had backed off the zoo. It felt like the zoo was already, the media and the certain aspects of the city were already kind of stepping in, and there was already kind of action happening there. So I then went and took my first visit to the bears, and my parents were supportive of that. My dad took me to see the bears for the first time, and that started a whole new project.
Wow. All right. Well, let me know if folks know that might just have tuned in a bit ago. This is Talking Animals on WNF. If you did just tune in, I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest is Justin Barker, a longtime anti-captivity activist, starting with launching, as we're hearing, his first organization, Citizens Lobbying for Animals in Zoos, at age 13. He went on to write a young adult memoir, Bear Boy, the true story of a boy, two bears, and the fight to be free. And also later in our conversation about founding San Francisco Zoo Watch, which continues kind of this theme, I think. So if you have any questions or comments for Justin, or would like to offer input about zoos, aquatic theme parks, or other venues with captive wildlife, please call 813-239-9663. Email dj@wmnf.org, or you can text 813-433-0885. So I guess even though we've kind of covered what sort of was motivating you on some of this, I just think it's interesting to try to address, with some hindsight and the wisdom you've gained, the why. As a young kid, basically, you felt compelled to take action. So many people of various ages and backgrounds are charmed by zoos, finding the animals and how they're presented enchanting. And I guess I wonder, what do you think those folks might be missing or overlooking about zoos that bothered you so profoundly, even as a very young person?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is from the earliest age, from age 0. We as a society are kind of bombarded with normalizing zoos. I have 2 kids now, and the number of books that really celebrate zoos, that, encourage, that even if it's not about a zoo, the characters going to visit the zoo, it's putting animals in cages in zoos is normalized from a very early age, and so it's not surprising why people love going to the zoo, because they hear about it from birth, essentially. And I think like many things, you can read the information about what your local zoo is doing, or read the little placards that are in front of exhibits, and think that zoos are actually the good guy, that they are really trying to help animals, that they're working on species survival programs to protect animals from extinction. The level of, I'll just say, greenwashing that happens if you don't do your research and you don't really fully understand the way that the zoo industry works, it's really, really easy to believe that you're doing the right thing, or that this is okay, and that the suffering of an individual animal that might happen is justified because we're saving species.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother conversation, maybe for another time, is the whole conservation theme that zoos tend to cultivate, which, typically never turns out to actually be the case, but it sounds good, and it's good for fundraising, and it's good for people to feel good about their local zoo. Excuse me. One thing that we just got an email in, and I thought that I had made specific reference to these issues involving wildlife, and I thought it was at least implicit, but in case that's not true, let me read this email for someone who may have a different impression of what we're discussing and why. This email says, well, the subject line is pet captivity, and then the email goes on to say, are not house cats and small indoor dogs also in captivity? Should they not all be released in the neighborhood to be free as feral cats and wild dogs? So I think that's probably a little case of apples and oranges from what we're actually focused on in our conversation today, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity to address it in whatever way you'd like.
Yeah, I think that the reason why we have cats and dogs in our lives is because there is a need for to house them. That that there is an overpopulation issue, and if you're somebody like me, I rescued my dog, and often people are rescuing cats and dogs, and that's just kind of like, from my perspective, I think that it's important to participate in the rescue of animals who would either be euthanized or not be able to be housed. So that's a whole. I think talking about cats and dogs in captivity is a whole other conversation that we could explore. But my issue with there are some zoos that are actively participating in conservation, but in general, the way the zoo industry works. I'll talk about just the city zoo industry because the roadside zoo industry is a whole other conversation. But the city zoos are often accredited by the AZA. And the AZA essentially has a species survival program. And the idea is that what they want people to think is that they're actively participating in conservation to protect species. And I have a very different definition of that, because the way the AZA considers the protection of species is keeping animals, maintaining captive populations, and that they are creating a diverse genetic pool to maintain the captive population of animals. And there is some work, some zoos donate to in situ conservation efforts, helping certain aspects of conservation in the field. But in general, the mission of zoos is to maintain captive populations. And that is problematic for me, because it's almost like what they've done is thrown their hands in the air and say, well, habitat loss, we're not going to focus on that. And, we just are going to do our job to maintain captive populations. And that's really problematic. And that leads to all sorts of problems where, the AZA, the zoos are acquiring elephants. Even up until 2019, they are extracting animals from the wild to maintain these captive populations. And I'm somebody who really believes that the way that we create, that I think that as humans, we need to protect habitats and do everything we can to allow animals to survive in the wild. That's what conservation means to me. And so I think that's the biggest misnomer about zoos, is that they are, saving species, when in fact they're just maintaining their populations for what at the end of the day is a business model to keep zoos stocked with exotic animals.
Yeah. Well, that's at least partly what I meant about the whole conservation ruse, which, sounds really cool, but when you ever look at a zoo that talks about its conservation program, and asked them how many animals of one kind or another that are endangered or running on a short population, how many have been returned to the wild from their conservation program. It's always zero. So, but again, we're talking about wildlife in a zoo as opposed to domesticated animals like house cats and dogs. So I think there's a huge distinction here to begin with. But one of the things I keep meaning to ask you, and I keep getting sidetracked, that has come up 3 or 4 times. Can you tell us what AZA means and what it is?
Yeah, it's the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. So they accredit city zoos, and essentially they, in theory, they create standards for zoos. But the more you dig into their standards, they're very flexible standards, kind of just like any organization. If you're trying to exist and you want to continue to exist as an entity, you really have to maintain relationships with zoos, and so they're pretty flexible about their standards, and they support orcas in captivity. Like I said, they support the extraction of elephants. So they're certainly an organization that holds zoos to a certain standard, and it's certainly a better standard than roadside zoos. But still, there's a long ways to go. There's a long ways to go to really reimagine what role zoos should play in our society. And I'm concerned that the AZA isn't necessarily ready or willing to help progress the role that zoos play in our world.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that later. I want to make sure we don't run out of time to talk about the San Francisco Zoo and your own efforts in that regard. But let's talk a little bit more at this moment about Bear Boy and just how it came together, and basically why you wrote the book and what did you set out to accomplish with it?
Certainly, like the working to save Brutus and Ursula, I hinted at it. Essentially what happened was I learned about these 2 bears that were living in a cage that was not much bigger than a shipping container, they lived next to a creek that flooded every few years. And it was really the only cage left in what was a defunct city zoo. And they were kind of the city of Roseville in the Sacramento Valley. Essentially, we're planning on just letting them die there and kind of suffer in this concrete, pretty terrible conditions. And essentially, I spent years advocating for their release, and then once we found a home and a city agreed to release them, I ended up raising $250,000 to get these bears relocated. And Bear Boy, the book is that story of really what it took, and all the details of what it took to really advocate for Brutus and Ursula. And it was really important for me to write this book. Firstly, because this campaign happened at such a pivotal point in my life as a teenager, as an adolescent. I spent much of my 20s with all these stories and all these memories in my head. And it was really important for me to get these stories and memories out of my head for my well-being.
For sure.
But also because I really wanted to play it forward. I wanted to make sure that the next generation of kids could experience what I experienced, about understanding the challenges that animals face in captivity. And that's really why I wrote it, was for imagining, who's that next, Justin, who might be struggling or who wants to take action. And that's why I really wrote Bear Boy, was to inspire young folks. So it's a YA novel, good for like 12 plus. And it's been really amazing. It's been out for the book came out 3 years ago, and it's been really, really cool to see, to be able to see what our books spread and how they impact people.
Yeah. Well, and also I assume it was why partly, like you said, this kind of reach out to aspiring Justins that might be out there that could be, helped and encouraged by this. But also I would think, too, on a related note, that you're probably mindful of your own experience with the Ingrid Newkirk book that kind of really further inspired you to take action and check out the zoo animals, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really important to hope that some young person might find Bear Boy in a used bookstore and see what that might happen, what might have happened with that.
And so, like you say, it's been out about 3 years or so, but tell me what happened last week, because I think that's really a cool story and just, again, another measure of your commitment to reaching out and reaching people with, various kinds of anti-captivity themes in a reasonable way.
Yeah, I got an email from a person saying, I'm blind, and is your book on audio? Is there an audiobook of Bear Boy? And I had been very hesitant to come out with Bear Boy an audiobook because, the 270 page book will end up at like about 5 hours of audio.
Yeah.
And that was very daunting for me. I have 2 kids. I'm busy with another campaign. And so I really hesitated to actually create an audiobook version just because of the time-consuming nature of it.
Sure.
And so I was like, I really want this person to be able to experience Bear Boy. And so I started looking into it, and I've been utilizing AI in my campaign for the San Francisco Zoo animals, and been really trying to utilize technology because it's essentially me and a small coalition of people. How do we progress these things using latest technology? And I did some research and found that there was this very cool voice cloning. And I was able to sit down and read a chapter of Bear Boy, record my voice, and then essentially AI cloned my voice. And so the audio book that just came out yesterday sounds like me. And it's not perfect. I'm guessing there's some moments where you'll be like, oh, that was a weird reading, or, there was certain expressions or the way that I would express a sentence or something is not exactly how I would do it. But for me, my work is always like, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how I approached it. I was like, okay, a cloned voice is not an ideal. I wish I had the time and the months of work to read this whole book, but I don't. And it is very impressive. Even my parents listening to it is like, we cannot believe that this is actually a clone. This sounds like you. It's pretty amazing. So the book came out yesterday, and it's a cloned narration.
So just so I'm clear on this, Justin, so you read the one chapter, and then you kind of like let the technology take over, which then effectively read, quote unquote, the rest of the book as it were you, saving you the hours of time that would be required to actually read the book in a more conventional audiobook setting.
Exactly.
Wow, that's cool. Well, let's hear.
I plugged in. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. So you're gonna hear a clip in a sec.
Literally. Yeah, I plugged the ebook version of the book right in, and then it read the whole book, and then here it is.
That's great. Well, let's hear a clip. This is Bear Boy, the true story of a boy, 2 bears, and the fight to be free. This is the audiobook version that Justin just produced in like a day or less than a day's time, and it just came out yesterday. So let's hear that right now here on Talking Animals on WMNF.
I'm going to investigate what's happening at the Sacramento Zoo, I declared, chasing my dad up the stairs, desperate to tell him what I had just learned about the zoo industry. Killer whales can live to be 100 in the wild, but some only live for 18 months when they are put in tanks. My dad slid the bathroom door closed, cutting me off. I usually left him alone when he got home, but not on that day. I sat down on the floor and leaned against the his and hers sinks outside of the bathroom, raising my voice so he could hear me. I continued. When animals get too old, they get sold to game farms where people pay to shoot them. Just give me 10 minutes, Justin, Dad pleaded through the door. I want to hear all about it, but I need a minute. My dad had never sounded so pathetic, and I figured this was a perfect moment to get him to agree to my request. Fine. I just want to know if you'll take me to the zoo on your way to work tomorrow. I waited for a second and then barked his name. Dad! I can take you, he said. We'll talk about it when I'm out.
And that's a clip of the audiobook Bear Boy, The True Story of a Boy, Two Bears, and the Fight to Be Free, a book written by our guest today, Justin Barker, here on Talking Animals. And that, just like I say, was released in an audiobook version yesterday, spurred by an email from a person who identified themselves as blind and just was wondering if there could be an audiobook, and he turned it around in like a day's time, like I say. So that's very cool. So I'm going to get into the San Francisco Zoo Watch in one sec, Justin, but this, again, seems to be an example of how skills of various kind and technology of various kind can really be a boon to helping animal welfare. I mean, in no small measure, just because that can be a big boost to storytelling, whether it's literal, as in the case of Bear Boy, or more figurative, like many shelters, for example, have been using storytelling on TikTok to promote adoption, and just countless other examples. But it seems like technology really is a huge asset to have, and having a mastery of it or finding the right thing like you did with this audiobook can go a long way towards improving an animal's lot in life, or just reaching people out with a different version of a story.
Certainly, I think it's pretty amazing the way in which technology has advanced, even in the last, 18 months with AI. And it's really important, I think, as folks, as activists, to really be utilizing technology to be able to expedite our causes. And it's really powerful. It's really powerful that, I was able to get this book out, for example, because I can move on and continue to do my storytelling and campaigning for SF Zoo animals. I think that I'm really excited about utilizing all these emerging technologies on behalf of animals.
For sure. So unfortunately, we're sort of nearing the end of our time, Justin, but let's briefly address San Francisco Zoo Watch. What is it, and what does it do?
Sure. San Francisco Zoo, for, close to 2 decades, has really struggled to take care of its animals. Animals have escaped. Predators have gotten in and killed animals. It's a really big issue. Essentially, there was a huge expose in the newspaper after years of trying to get local journalists to tell these stories about what's happening. And San Francisco Zoo Watch is really an organization to hold the San Francisco Zoo accountable and to really get the information available to the public about what's happening at San Francisco Zoo. And it's part of a larger campaign. I kind of imagine campaigns, 2 prongs to campaigns. One is to really highlight problems that exist and let that be known, and then really focus on what the solution is. And so SF Zoo Watch is the first part of a campaign to really highlight the problems at San Francisco Zoo. The next phase of this campaign is just beginning on what is the solution to actually creating a zoo that truly takes care of its animals and is participating in the protection of species, both in its care and internationally.
Well, that sounds great, and maybe we'll have that conversation when you're in the next phase another time here on Talking Animals, because we have just about reached the end of our time. This has been Justin Barker. You can find out more about San Francisco Zoo Watch and those efforts that he just touched on by going to sfzoo.watch, and more about Justin in his various places, including justinbarker.tv. And Justin, thank you so much for joining us today on Talking Animals and all your great efforts, starting when you were a wee lad and obviously continuing as we speak. So that's really great. Animals have a great ally in you.
No, appreciate the time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. In a moment, I'll speak with Nadia Tenori about Thanks Vegan, the 15th annual potluck organized by Photo Voices for Animals held on Thanksgiving Day. That's tomorrow, of course, November 28th, the Unitarian Universalist of Tampa. Right now, we're going to step into the Comedy Corner with a long-time Talking Animals favorite, Jim Gaffigan, and a piece called Fittingly Enough, Thanksgiving, in today's Comedy Corner on Talking Animals on WMNF.
Thanksgiving. That is all about overeating. I mean, one of the main dishes is actually called stuffing. Stuffing? What names have they turned down? Cram it in? Eat till you can't breathe? Am I the only one that doesn't feel comfortable with the fact stuffing is cooked inside a dead animal? Shove a loaf of bread up there? Delicious. Kind of a humiliating way to go out for the turkey. You're gonna kill me? Oh, it's gonna get a lot worse. You do not want to know.
That was Jim Gaffigan in today's Comedy Corner with a piece called Thanksgiving, taken from his special Dark Pale. Now it's time to speak with Nadia Tenori of Florida Voices for Animals and their Thanks Vegan event, the 15th annual, no less, happening tomorrow. Here's Nadia Tenori back on Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Nadia.
How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Okay, cool. So at the risk of stating the obvious, what exactly is Thanks Vegan?
So Thanks Vegan, this is our 15th annual Thanks Vegan. It's a vegan Thanksgiving potluck that we've done in Tampa since 2007. Give or take a few years that things got in the way.
Yes.
And this is potentially our last year. So it is a massive potluck that's been a part of Tampa for over a decade. Something that's close to a lot of our hearts here in the vegan community.
Wow, that's kind of a bombshell to get the conversation started with. Why is this coming to an end?
Well, over the years, for lots of wonderful reasons, there's tons of other Thanksgiving events going on, and then also, it's a big event, hard to put on, requires a lot of volunteers, and people come and go. Some of the main organizers have left the area, and it's for a number of reasons with volunteers and lots of other events. I think this might just be one of the last years we're doing it. Also, renting the venue has changed in price over the years. And, I think we might have just kind of come to the point where
it's time.
It's time, yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha. All right, well, fill us in on, since tomorrow is still very much happening, and tell me what the details that people need to know that might still not be quite sure what they're doing on Thanksgiving themselves and maybe want to get in on Thanks Vegan.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is potluck style. So you bring a vegan dish, so no honey, no eggs, no animal products of any kind, no dairy, all of that. The social portion starts at 1:30. You bring a dish that feeds 8 people. If it's a couple, 16 plus people. And we'll have social time. We will have the eating at 2 p.m. and dessert afterwards. And the whole event ends at 5:30.
Well, that sounds very cool, very tightly organized, reflecting all the years of experience, I'm sure. So is there anything else specifically people would need to know if they're going to sort of at the last minute say, hey, you know what, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do tomorrow, but I think I'm going to do this. So obviously they bring a dish for either 8 or 16, but what else needs to be brought to sort of be on target with the requirements?
So to make things easier and the line go faster, we suggest that you bring an ingredient card, like an index card with all of the ingredients that are in the dish, and label your serving spoons and the dish that you brought it in. That makes everything go a bit faster when you get there. The event's in Tampa off of Fowler and Morrisbridge Road kind of area. You can go to thanksvegan.com to get all the information. There's the general information and then a fact, the frequently asked questions portion as well.
Well, that's great. And And if I recall, parking's a little tight there, so I think people are they still kind of encouraged to carpool if they can?
Yeah, we encourage people to carpool if they can. Parking is free, but, there is only so much parking. It's a pretty big parking area, but it tends to be quite a big event, too. So absolutely, if you can carpool, we suggest that you do.
And I know you guys are always looking for volunteers, and it's probably never too late to get people to say, hey, I'll help clean up, or I'll help do this or that. How would someone, if they said, hey, I'd like to participate in one way or other, including maybe volunteering, how would they contact someone to say, yeah, you can count on me?
Yeah, so thanksvegan@gmail.com. If you send an email there, we are always looking for volunteers. You can also show up, a little early, day of, and see how you might be able to help there, and we'll, guide you to where we are most needing help.
Well, that sounds great. All right, so it's thanksvegan.com for the website, and it's thanksvegan@gmail.com to find out more information or ask questions or offer your services or clarify anything that we just talked about here.
Exactly.
All right, Nadia, well, good luck, and thanks for joining us again on Talking Animals, and happy Thanksvegan to you.
Thank you so much. You too. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Coming up on WNF, it's The Conversation, the great show hosted by Mario Nunez and Joe King Carter. After that, we shift back to music programming with Jim Bannon, holding forth from 1 to 3, followed by Nancy C., hosting the Wednesday Traffic Jam from 3 to 6 p.m., at which point our terrific Wednesday night block of Latin music kicks in. Right now on this show at the moment, as a prize for naming an animal tune, I'll be offering fabulous, something fabulous. Just count on it being fabulous from the Talking Animals Vault. The first person who calls 813-239-9663 correctly identifies this animal song. Just name that animal tune on Talking Animals on WMNF.
This is a story of famous dog. But the dog that chases its tail will be busy. These are clapping dogs, rhythmic dogs, harmonic dogs, house dogs, street dogs, dogs of the world unite, dancing dogs. Yeah, counting dogs, funky dogs. Nasty dogs.
All right, the question is, can you name that animal tune? We'll find out soon enough, I'm sure. We have just about reached the end of today's edition, though, of Talking Animals on WMNF. My guest next Wednesday will be Michael Hinkson, who's blind since birth and an inspirational speaker-author whose most notable experience probably happened on 9/11 when he was in the North Tower during the attack, and his guide dog led him and others to safety. He's published a new book, Live Like a Guide Dog, which draws on his experience living with several guide dogs over his lifetime and what it's taught him, including how being afraid sometimes can actually be a virtue, overcoming adversity, and how to be brave in challenging circumstances and more. I invite you to join me for that conversation next Wednesday, December 4th. Also invite you to visit talkinganimals.net for audio archives of every show we've ever broadcast. Apple Podcasts are available there too, as well as on other podcast platforms. And there are, of course, the links to our social media pages and more. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to find out a little bit about our guests a couple days beforehand, or other scintillating news from the Talking Animals headquarters. I'm Duncan Strauss. Thanks very much for listening. Have a good week. Be kind to animals, be kind to others, be kind to yourself. This is Talking Animals on WMNF, Tampa, Brandon, Largo, Weeki Wachee, and beyond. Stay tuned for the conversation coming up momentarily after the NPR News headlines, and then Jim Bannon after that, and Nancy C. after that, getting us right back into the thick of things musically. So, hope you have a great Thanksgiving and or Thanksvegan, as case may be. And I'll see you next Wednesday here on Talking Animals with another edition of the show. Thanks so much.